Eleanor Hart had spent 3 full days coaxing warmth into her small house. Lines on her hands mapped decades of chopping, stirring, and baking, and today they moved with the calm precision of ritual. On the counter, a deep pan of slow-simmered lasagna rested beside a glossy chocolate cake filled with tart raspberry. A small casserole of macaroni seasoned with the little trick that always made the kids grin waited under foil. Even a temperamental gluten-free quiche, finally perfect on the 3rd attempt, cooled on a rack. The dining room gleamed like a memory restored. Eleanor had polished the table she'd saved for when her children were small. Now it reflected candlelight and handwritten place cards. Daniel, Claire, Ava, Noah, Grace, Olivia. And out of stubborn kindness, Richard, the ex-husband, she had learned to tolerate at holidays. Frame photos lined the buffet, Daniel's graduation. Claire's wedding to David. God rest him. Ava's toothless kindergarten smile, the twins' first day home. 65 years of living, 40 teaching literature, 20. Holding the family together since Richard walked out, all gathered under one roof. They'll be here at 1, she murmured, adjusting a fork that didn't need adjusting. At 1:30, the lasagna steam thinned. Eleanor texted Daniel, "Everything's ready. Traffic okay?" At 2:00, she called Claire. Voicemail. At 2:30, she tried Ava. Nothing. By 4:00, the candles had melted to tired puddles, and Eleanor stared at a phone that refused to ring. Then a message arrived from Daniel, a bright photo of her entire family around a sun-splashed table in Veronica Hale's glass-walled sunroom. Daniel's arm circled Olivia. The twins clutched desserts that weren't from Eleanor's kitchen. Claire lifted a champagne flute, and there sat Richard, far too at ease at Veronica's side. Under the image, "Sorry, Mom." Veronica put together a special brunch and wouldn't take no. Kids have sports later. Claire's taking Ava shopping. "Let's do your birthday next weekend." "Love you." Another photo. Laughter. Richard pouring drinks. A cake with elegant script. Celebrating Veronica's generosity. Aspen. "Here we come." The words knocked the breath from Eleanor's chest. So that was the price of everyone's time, a winter trip and a lavish afternoon, purchased, packaged, posted. Eleanor set the phone face down. Something inside that had bent too long finally held its shape. She packed the untouched dishes into containers with methodical care. Love saved for was saved for another day. Then she remembered a conversation from days earlier. Mr. Lawson, her attorney, had confirmed the release of her late father's estate. The plan had been simple: divide it between Daniel, Claire, and the grandchildren over coffee and cake. She dialed Mr. Lawson instead. "It's Eleanor Hart. I need to pause the distribution we discussed and arrange immediate access to a portion." "Of course, may I ask?" "I have travel plans." After she hung up, Eleanor poured a glass of wine she rarely allowed herself and opened her laptop. Within an hour, she had booked a 3-week tour through the Italian countryside, the trip she'd postponed every time someone else needed her more. The following days grew strangely quiet. A perfunctory gift from Daniel appeared on the kitchen counter, a scarf with the clearance tag still attached. He talked about Veronica's Aspen reservations, the twins' excitement, the amazing Sunday dinners Richard now attended. Eleanor nodded, offering nothing. As soon as the door closed, she made another call, this time to a private investigator recommended by a former colleague. Suspicion, once unwelcome, had become necessary. 2 days before departure, a thick envelope arrived, dates, transfers, photographs that rewrote the recent past in unforgiving detail. Eleanor slept little that night. In the morning, she created copies, added clear tabs, and typed brief notes a teacher would be proud of. On Friday, the day before her flight, she asked Daniel to stop by. He hovered at the doorway, glancing at his watch. "It's important," she said, pressing the sealed envelope into his hands. "Promise me you'll read this tonight." "What is it, Mom?" Taxes. "It's about Veronica and your father." That made him still. "What about them?" "Just read." At 4:00 p.m. after he left, Eleanor powered off her phone as the taxi pulled up. She estimated Daniel would open the envelope around 7 after dinner in that impeccable sunroom. By 8, her family's tidy illusions would be cracked open like the top of a creme brulee. But Eleanor wouldn't be there with a spoon and napkins to tidy the mess. For the first time in years, she chose herself. Veronica Hale's house was designed to make people feel fortunate to be invited and slightly ashamed to belong anywhere else. Light pooled across marble like water. Glass walls turned the late afternoon sky into a moving mural. A quartet played something tasteful and forgettable. Daniel arrived with Olivia on his arm, the mysterious envelope from his mother tucked beneath a folder of contracts in his briefcase. A butler relieved him of the case, and the envelope slid free, skating onto the entryway's inlaid wood. Olivia's mother noticed first. "What have we here, darling?" Veronica's tone was silk wrapped around steel. "Something from my mom," Daniel said, scooping it up. Probably thank you notes. Of course, Veronica smiled, the kind that measured people while appearing to flatter them. Do get a drink. Richard is already here. Richard. His father stood by the hearth in a jacket Daniel didn't recognize. He'd never dressed like this when Daniel was a kid, always rumpled, vaguely apologetic chalk dust on tired sleeves. Now he looked polished, comfortable in Veronica's curated world. Dinner unfolded with Veronica's usual choreography. Names were placed at the table to create pleasing conversations. Servers appeared and vanished like stagehands. Daniel kept a hand near his jacket pocket where the envelope now resided, though he kept forgetting it existed. Toasts were made to Aspen, Veronica's little winter surprise. Olivia laughed in that careful way she used when she wanted her mother to approve. Halfway through the main course, Richard swirled his wine and asked, casual as a fisherman throwing a line, will Eleanor join us in Aspen, do we think? She prefers simpler things, Veronica answered for everyone, and she has finances to consider. What finances? Claire asked from 2 seats down, her voice sharper than the stem of her glass. Richard faltered, recovering too late. Your grandfather's estate finally came through, he said. Nothing enormous, mind you, but a tidy sum, Lawson called. Lawson called you? Daniel interrupted. The room shifted. The quartet's music, once unobtrusive, suddenly felt like a cover. Veronica lifted a hand. More champagne, she trilled. And wait until you hear about the private chef at the chalet. The moment slid past visibly awkwardly, like ice refusing to melt, but it lodged in Daniel's ribs. When a client rang a few minutes later, Daniel excused himself and stepped into Veronica's study, a room arranged to suggest intellect without inviting thought. He set down his phone, felt the press of paper against his chest, and finally pulled the envelope free, his name in his mother's tidy hand. No embellishment, no guilt trip, just the quiet authority of a teacher who expected you to do the reading. He opened it. The first item was a photo Richard and Veronica at a restaurant Daniel knew for its back entrance. The angle was telescopic, the kind of grainy that only comes from distance and patience. Next, the two of them entering a hotel a town away. Veronica's hand anchoring Richard's elbow. Another, their fingers intertwined on a bench overlooking a pond Daniel had been taken to as a boy. He kept turning pages even when his stomach climbed into his throat. Financial papers followed, annotated with his mother's small, precise notes, arrows, and dates. A shell company had purchased the mortgage on Eleanor's house 6 months earlier, the registered address traced back to Veronica's investment attorney. A series of gifts and loans moved between accounts like unmarked parcels. Their timing lined up with key moments: the day Eleanor tried to schedule a family dinner, the afternoon of Claire's apartment hunt, the weekend Veronica whisked the twins to a ski resort Eleanor could not afford. Email printouts. We'll make sure Sunday is at my place instead. She doesn't need to know about the refinance yet. If she asks, you can say you were helping. Threads where ordinary words arranged themselves into a net. Then transcripts, excerpts from recorded conversations Daniel didn't want to imagine hearing. Veronica. Has she mentioned the inheritance again? Richard Lawson confirmed the transfer last week. Veronica. We just have to keep her busy with her little plans. Richard. She'll divide it anyway. She always intended to. We're just guiding. Daniel found the last page, a note from Eleanor, not dramatic, not pleading. I'll be out of contact for 3 weeks. Read this tonight. Decide what kind of son you want to be. E. He stood in the silence of the museum-like room and pressed his palms to the desk until the wood left crescents in his skin. Olivia appeared in the doorway without knocking. Mother's about to make a speech, she began, then froze at his face. What's wrong? He held up one of the photographs, not the worst, not the most obvious. Enough. Did you know? Her eyes flickered, then steadied. It's complicated. That's not an answer. I knew they were close. Color rose beneath her foundation. I didn't know about the mortgage or the money. I suspected things. But Daniel, you know how your mother is. Everything becomes about her, he said, stunned at the words in his own mouth, how easily they'd been placed there over months of brunches. He put the photo down as if it were hot. She cooked for days. We sent a photo from this house. Olivia closed the study door. If you start a scene, she'll never forgive. Who? Daniel asked. Your mother or mine? He didn't wait for another answer. He tucked the file under his arm and walked back to the dining room. The first shout came from Claire. She was holding a page with the mortgage paperwork, her hand trembling. You bought Mom's debt, she said to Veronica, incredulous, turning to fury. Quietly, through a shell. Veronica didn't rise from her chair. She was the kind of person who let other people stand up first. I secured a better interest rate for her, she said smoothly. It's what family does. We're not your family, Claire snapped. Richard stood then, palms out, diplomat of disasters he'd authored. Let's not escalate, Dad Daniel said, and had to stop to swallow. Do not. Do not mediate this. Olivia reached for her mother's wrist. Maybe we should sit, Veronica said to her daughter very softly. Then to the room, if Eleanor had made different choices, none of this would be necessary. I merely stepped into a vacuum. Ava, who had been scrolling on her phone under the table, looked up at that. A vacuum, she repeated. You mean my grandmother's life? The quartet faltered, found their footing again in waltz time. The room filled with the kind of quiet that carries the weight of a verdict. One of the servers disappeared so completely Daniel thought for a second he'd imagined the man. Leave, Claire said to Richard and then to Veronica. And you stay away from Noah and Grace until we figure this out. You don't get to buy people and then call it love. Veronica's mouth tightened. I'll speak to my attorney. Wonderful, Daniel said. Then you can explain why my mother's mortgage leads to your office and why you were planning our holidays to collide with hers. Veronica looked past him, then toward the window as if the horizon held a friendlier audience. By the time dessert arrived, something layered and delicate, no one was hungry for sweetness. Daniel's hands shook as he dialed his mother. The call went straight to voicemail. Again. He walked out to the driveway, cool air scraping his lungs clean. Claire followed, left arm clutched around her ribs like bandaging. Ava trailed, eyes bright and wet, 14 and suddenly ancient. What do we do? Claire asked. Daniel looked at the house where his wife stood silhouetted beside her mother's sculpted hydrangeas, and at the envelope packed with evidence he hadn't asked for and couldn't unknow. We start by leaving, he said. They did. Eleanor woke to church bells she didn't recognize. The room was small, thoughtfully arranged, a narrow wardrobe, a bedside table with a ceramic lamp shaped like a pear, a single framed sketch of a hill town. She lay still and let the unfamiliar light paint the ceiling streaks of sun made soft by shutters. For a moment she forgot the habit of checking her phone. Then she remembered she had turned it off and felt relieved. Outside Montepulciano rose and folded like fabric streets curling around stone. The tour group gathered in the courtyard after breakfast, strangers held together by curiosity and a schedule printed in crisp fonts. Their guide, a woman with a linen scarf and the kind of calm that only comes from handling 100 jet-lagged Americans, introduced herself as Francesca. We walk, Francesca said, smiling. We taste. We learn to be patient with ourselves and with the food. Eleanor drank the words like water. They climbed lanes that tilted the ankles and demanded attention. The cathedral was cooler than the air, the kind of cool that carries centuries' worth of whispered petitions. In a leather shop, an elderly man burnished edges with a small wooden tool, his hands in conversation with the craft. From a Belvedere vineyard, Rose stitched the landscape into order. At lunch, Eleanor sat beside a silver-haired woman who introduced herself as Margot. You alone, Margot asked, not unkindly, and raised her glass before Eleanor could answer. Good. Eleanor surprised herself by laughing. Widow twice, Margot said. Turns out I'm very good at beginnings. They learned to taste, not just drink. A winemaker named Paolo, sun-leathered and precise, poured ruby circles into stemware and taught them to wait. Let it breathe, he said, cupping the bowl of his own glass. Air is part of the flavor. You rush, you miss what it wants to tell you. Eleanor held the instruction in her mouth as carefully as the wine. Air is part of the flavor. So is time. So is hunger. The cooking class that evening turned flour into a room of clouds. Eleanor's hands remembered 1,000 meals but behaved differently when there were no expectations attached. She rolled pasta sheets thin enough to see the shadow of her fingers and didn't apologize when the first batch tore. Margot swore at a stubborn dough with Chicago elegance. The instructor pretended not to hear. When Eleanor fell into bed, wine-warmed and bone-tired, she reached for her phone by habit and encountered the quiet fact of its dark screen. She set it back down, almost shy with her own resolve. On the second day, she wrote in a journal she'd bought at the airport. A plain notebook, not the kind with gilded edges that feels too grand to use. She did not make lists. She wrote fragments. The word no fits in the mouth like a seed. If you plant it, something grows. She sketched the curve of a hillside badly and kept the sketch anyway. On the third day, Margot said, When are you going to tell me why you ran? I didn't run, Eleanor said, and then smiled at herself because of course she had. Margot gave her the kind of look women give one another when they've reached an age where performance loses to honesty. If it helps, she said, my first trip was because my daughter informed me she was staging an intervention to save me from grief accessories. What on earth is a grief accessory? Apparently antique teacups, Margot said deadpan, and a tendency to bake for my feelings. Eleanor laughed until her eyes watered. It felt good to laugh without patching anyone else's discomfort. She made a new rule that afternoon. She would turn her phone on when she wanted company, not when she feared disappointment. She waited another day. Then, in a quiet hour between a bell tower and an espresso, she pressed and held the button until the screen bloomed to life. The device convulsed with missed calls and messages. Threads from Daniel shifted tones offhand. Call me when you can, then worried mom, where are you? Then brittle. We need to talk about something important. Claire's messages braided apology and anger, the kind of anger that knows it has been misdirected for too long. Ava's text was simple. I love you. I'm sorry. She read without replying. If panic tickled her throat, she breathed until it passed. She exited the app and took a photo of a stray cat, sleeping on a warm stoop, ears flicking in dream. She ate gelato on a curb. After dinner in her room, she typed a single message and sent it to Daniel and Claire. I'm safe and well. I'll contact you when I'm back. Please respect my time away. She turned the phone off again and felt her shoulders drop. Somewhere across an ocean, people who loved her would have to figure out how to keep loving without her riding the ship. In Boston, Daniel stared at his mother's message until the words blurred. The relief at those first two sentences startled him. I'm safe and well, as if he hadn't realized how thoroughly fear had colonized his body until it loosened his grip. The request that followed was reasonable and impossible at once. Respect her time away. He wanted to. He also wanted to drive to the airport and wait at the international arrivals door like a teenager who'd watched too many movies. He sat on the stoop outside his house in the blue that comes just before dark and called Claire. She texted me too, Claire said, voice small. Did you read everything she left you? Yes. He closed his eyes more than once. Do you believe all of it? I don't have to believe it, Daniel said, surprised by the steadiness of his voice. It's paper, dates, numbers. A photograph of our father holding Veronica's hand in a place where hands tell truth. Claire was quiet for a long moment. Ava heard me tell David once that Mom was the spine of our family. Today she asked me why we treated a spine like a coat rack. Daniel pinched the bridge of his nose. What do we do with this? We start by telling the truth, Claire said. To ourselves, to Olivia, to the kids. He thought of Noah and Grace building Lego cities on Veronica's white rug, while being told in 100 subtle ways which houses you're allowed to enter and which doors are for other people. He thought of Olivia, who had been raised to admire her mother's decisiveness, the way some people admire a mountain as if the only options were to climb it or be crushed. I'll talk to Olivia, he said. Do you? Claire hesitated. Do you think Mom will forgive us? She's not the kind of person who keeps ledgers, Daniel said. But I don't think forgiveness is the point anymore. What is change, he said, and surprised himself again by meaning it. Eleanor's tour moved south where hills tipped toward the sea and the sky made a habit of extravagance. She let herself be led. A bus smelled like oranges and sunscreen. Shallow waves tangled lace around her ankles. In Sorrento, she bought lemon soap and resisted buying an impractical dress that felt like a past life navigating a gift shop. Francesca arranged a picnic on a cliff where wind pulled at napkins and voices. Margot poured wine from a thermos. A man from Oregon cried when he tasted a tomato. No one made fun of him. Eleanor wrote another fragment in her notebook. If the body remembers harm, it must also remember care. She thought about kitchens, how she had learned to match her movements to the needs of the room, how skill can become a disguise when it is never allowed to serve the self. She began to wonder what else she was good at that had nothing to do with feeding other people. One evening alone on the balcony, she allowed the thought that she had not only been manipulated, she had also been willing to be the one who says yes, who shows up, who swallows the slight because there was dinner to serve and grandchildren to bathe and essays to grade. She did not blame herself. She took stock. Taking stock is different than assigning blame. It is a ledger of possibility. She turned her phone on once more quickly, the way you lift a lid to check a simmer. New messages waited, of course. Olivia's brittle, then soft. Daniel's growing in humility. Claire wandering through a grief that had lost its center. One from Richard, 3 sentences that tried for contrition and landed in self-preservation. Eleanor didn't reply to that one. Veronica had not texted. She had likely moved to printed stationery and a lawyer's letterhead. Eleanor sent a second note just to Daniel. Thank you for respecting my request. I will have specific boundaries when I'm back. Prepare yourself to hear them. The language felt both teacherly and exact. She had given him instructions all his life. The difference now was that the lesson would no longer end with her doing the work for him. She slept well. On a Sunday in Boston, Veronica appeared at Daniel and Olivia's front step without calling ahead a bouquet tucked so tightly into tissue that the flowers looked strangled. Darling, she said to Olivia, ignoring Daniel, we can't let your mother's dramatics derail a perfectly good family. My mother's dramatics, Daniel repeated, feeling something brittle and dangerous at the edges of his self-control. Emotion is her native language, Veronica said pleasantly. It's not a criticism. We all have our strengths. What's yours? Daniel asked. Acquisitions. Olivia flinched. Veronica pretended not to see. We'll manage the optics, she said briskly. I'll host something bright and distracting. Children forget unpleasantness when you give them enough sugar. Enough, Olivia said, surprising herself with the firmness in her voice. Mom, stop. Veronica turned the full beam of her displeasure onto her daughter. You've always been sentimental, she said. It's charming. It's also expensive. Daniel realized then that the conversation wasn't about Eleanor in Veronica's mind. It was about the experience of losing control in a house where she had been the weather. He pictured Eleanor on a hillside smelling of thyme and sea salt, and decided he could live with bad weather for a while if it meant the climate was changing. "Please leave," he said. "We'll be in touch when we decide what comes next." "You'll regret choosing her version of events," Veronica said softly. "I think we're done letting other people write them." Olivia answered softer still, but with a new shape in her mouth where a different kind of woman had moved in. Veronica went. The bouquet stayed on the step for an hour before Olivia carried it to the bin and set it gently like laying down a costume. Eleanor stood on the deck of a small boat and watched the Amalfi Coast unspool like a ribbon you'd kept for years without noticing its color. The spray caught the sun and shattered it into sequins. Margot leaned against the rail beside her and said nothing for a long time, the kind of friendship that respects silence. "Do you ever worry," Eleanor asked, at last, "that if you change the rules there won't be a game to play?" Margot chuckled. "Honey, the old rules were rigged. And if the players refuse to try new ones, then you find different players," Margot said. "Or you play alone until they get bored of losing to the person who isn't even at the table." Eleanor watched the wake soften behind them. She took out her notebook and wrote 2 words, "No more." No more arranging her life around other people's comfort while calling it love. No more making herself small in rooms that asked her to be invisible. No more pretending a cake can cover the taste of contempt simply because the frosting is perfect. She did not yet know how any of that would sound in her living room in Boston, in English and in ordinary voices. She only knew that the voice she would use belonged to her. When the boat curved toward shore and the engine quieted to a purr, Eleanor felt a new kind of hunger, the good kind, the kind that means you are ready for whatever is next. Rome asked for attention the way a violin demands a bow, no sound without contact. On Eleanor Hart's last night, she let the city touch her. She walked without a map, letting streets braid and unbraid beneath her feet until she reached a small fountain tucked behind a church where laundry lines crossed like notes on staff paper. She didn't make a wish, she made a decision. Back at the hotel, she texted her son, "Airport pickup Thursday. Just you. No surprises. No gathering at the house. I need 24 hours of quiet before I see anyone else." Daniel answered in seconds. "Understood. I'll be there." Eleanor slept well. Boston air carried a thin edge of salt as the plane door opened. Daniel stood beyond the barrier, taller than his childhood, but smaller than the past 3 weeks had made him eyes bruised with worry and resolve. He took her carry-on without performing penitence. "Welcome home, Mom. Thank you for coming alone," she said, and meant it. They talked logistics on the drive mail held at the post office, a leaky gutter he'd had someone patch the neighbor's dog who howled at sirens but not at ambulances anymore because the neighborhood had learned to get there before the sirens mattered. The bridge threw a net of shadows over the Charles. Eleanor watched them ripple, then settle. At a red light, Daniel tried an apology on his tongue. "I thought—" "Not today," Eleanor said gently. "Listen first." He nodded hands at 10 and 2 like a man relearning basics. The house opened to her like a book she'd loved and then forgotten. The kitchen counters were clear. A jar of good coffee sat beside a note in Claire's looping hand. "For your first morning back. No agenda." In the living room, a vase held chrysanthemums, yellow, not the forced splendor of lilies. On her bed, fresh sheets, a small stack of folded towels, and a single wrapped bar of lemon soap that smelled faintly of a place where water is an event. "Thank you for keeping things alive," she said, touching a houseplant that had attempted drama in her absence and been persuaded otherwise. Claire watered, Daniel admitted. "I replaced one basil. It didn't survive my optimism." He hesitated in the doorway, unsure of the choreography. "I'll go," he said. "I'll call tomorrow to see when you want to talk." "Tomorrow afternoon," Eleanor said. 1 hour. Bring nothing but the truth." He looked almost relieved to have rules. The next morning began without an alarm. Eleanor brewed the coffee, sat at the table she had once polished into a mirror, and dialed Mr. Lawson. "Welcome home, Miss Hart. Shall I assume Italy agreed with you?" "It did," she said, and it clarified the paperwork. They met mid-morning. Lawson's office smelled faintly of old paper and new printers, a marriage of permanence and speed. Eleanor reviewed the documents slowly, as if words could bruise if you turned them too fast. "We'll finalize the irrevocable trust for the grandchildren," Lawson said, tapping the appropriate page with a careful finger. "Education and health expenses only until 25 with a review clause thereafter. You'll be trustee while you're living. Margaret Adler as successor." "Good," Eleanor said. "Claire and Daniel get nothing from this trust. They'll have their lives to build. The point isn't punishment, it's precision." "And the mortgage?" Lawson asked. Eleanor's mouth hardened. "I want it off my house and out of her hands." Lawson slid across a second packet. "We purchased the note from the shell entity yesterday morning when their attorney was distracted by other fires. Once this is signed, your home is free and clear. I also recommend placing the title in your living trust to prevent creative generosity from becoming leverage." They signed, ink-anchored intent to the world. One more thing, Eleanor said, and watched her reflection steady in the glass of his framed diploma. Add a letter to the file, my explicit wish that communications about my finances are never discussed with Richard Hart or anyone acting on behalf of Miss Veronica Hale. Already drafted, Lawson said, eyes kind. You are not the first person to find boundaries require stationery. Eleanor smiled despite herself. No, but I intend to be one of the last who learns it late. At 2:00, Daniel arrived with nothing in his hands. Eleanor poured tea into mugs that didn't match. The mismatch felt correct. Here are the terms, she said. I'm going to say them once without defending them. You can ask clarifying questions. You cannot negotiate. He sat forward. Okay, I'm not on call. Eleanor began. I'll help because I want to, not because silence makes me feel responsible. No more triangulation, no messages through you from your father or from Miss Hale. If you choose to attend her events, that's your choice. I won't compete and I won't repair the consequences. Holidays are not battlegrounds. If our dates conflict, pick one without guilt-tripping me for existing. Daniel exhaled hard. I agree. You haven't heard them all. I agree anyway, he said, but go on. I won't loan money. Gifts are rare and without strings. When I say no, it isn't a test. I will not host every memory you want to have. You will make some yourselves. Daniel rubbed at a crease in his jeans. I didn't realize how much of my adult life was scheduled by other people until you stopped scheduling around us. That's good, she said. Realizing is the first polite thing you've done for yourself and for me in a long time. He nodded, throat-working. Olivia and I moved out of the guest house at my mother-in-law's. We'll rent for a while. She doesn't know how to live without orchestrating, and I don't know how to stop letting her. We're going to learn. I'm glad, Eleanor said, and meant it without needing him to feel the relief for her. He swallowed again. I'm sorry for the photo, for that day, for all the days before it that made the photo possible. I know, Eleanor said. Sorry is a receipt, change is the purchase. He put his face in his hands for a moment. When he lifted it, it was older and new. I can't fix the harm you carried while cooking for people who thought the food was the point. But I can stop asking you to carry it. Good, she said, and the word felt like a hinge that had found oil. The next day, Eleanor met Claire at a small cafe halfway between their houses. Claire arrived early, that old habit of trying to be where crisis lands before it does. She stood when she saw her mother as if the table required ceremony. You look. Claire searched for a word and settled on one that didn't try to manage anything. Good. Thank you, Eleanor said. Sit. We'll talk like equals. Are we? Claire asked her, laugh a little broken. I've been a mother for 18 years, and I'm only now understanding how lazy love can get when you let someone do the emotional heavy lifting. We let it, Eleanor said simply, both of us. Claire looked startled, then relieved. I kept using you as a net, then resenting you for being under me, and I kept leaping without checking if I wanted to jump, Eleanor said. That's over. Claire nodded. Ava told me last week that she wants to cook with you again only if you want to. She said she misses the way you make mistakes useful. Eleanor smiled. That sounds like a girl who deserves good knives. They talked practicalities, school schedules, the dwindling emergency supplies of humor Claire kept in her purse, whether David's watch should be repaired or left stopped where it had quietly chosen to end. They said the word grief without asking it to perform. When they stood to leave, Claire didn't ask for forgiveness. She thanked her mother for clarity. That's the gift I can give, Eleanor said, and I expect reciprocity. You'll get it, Claire said, and her voice contained less weather. Ava walked with Eleanor that evening, hands jammed in the pockets of an oversized hoodie that had never been to the school whose name it advertised. They passed lawns that tried too hard and porches that didn't try at all. I thought I was being independent, Ava said without preamble. Choosing friends over family dinners, choosing brunches that looked good on my phone. I wasn't independent. I was outsourced. It's easier to perform freedom than to practice it, Eleanor said. Being seen is work. Doing the seeing is work too. Ava kicked an acorn into the street. I saw what they wanted me to. Your house got smaller in my mind. Miss Hale's house got big like a movie set. I'm sorry. Thank you, Eleanor said. You don't owe me guilt. You owe me attention. I can do that, Ava said. She hesitated, then added, Will you teach me the pasta from a place that isn't here? I will teach you to salt the water, Eleanor said. The rest you'll learn with your hands. They laughed, and the sound didn't ask anything of either of them. Eleanor waited 3 days before inviting them all at once. She kept the invitation plain Sunday 3 to 5. Lemonade and something simple. Come if you can. Leave when you must. No guests from outside the immediate family. Daniel arrived with flowers not expensive enough to announce apology, which was precisely right. Olivia brought a bakery box of cannoli and placed it down as if setting aside a script she'd been handed at birth. Noah and Grace hovered at the garden gate until Eleanor waved them through like planes on a calm runway. Claire and Ava came carrying nothing but themselves. This too felt right. They sat on the patio where weathered chairs remembered other gatherings. Eleanor poured lemonade into sturdy glasses that fit her hand. "Thank you for coming," she said when they'd settled. "I'll be brief. I love you." "That is not in question. Love will no longer look like me arranging my life around yours. It will look like respect both directions. It will look like me saying no without essays and you hearing it without hearings." She watched their faces as she spoke, checking for comprehension, the way she once watched students search for a thesis that wouldn't hide from them. "I will not be compared to anyone," she continued. "Not to Miss Hale's spending power, not to her available staff, not to her appetite for being at the center of a photograph. I do not compete. I participate." Olivia's eyes shone. Daniel stared at the wood grain of the table like a man who had just realized tables existed to hold more than plates. "Holidays," Eleanor said, and the word made all their shoulders rise a fraction. "We will decide them together or separately, without hostility. If you choose to attend events at Miss Hale's, I wish you an easy day. I will not adjust my calendar to avoid overlap. I will not create overlap to prove a point." Claire nodded, a tear escaping without fanfare. "Understood." Finally, Eleanor said, "There will be no gifts or trips with strings. Not for me. Not for me. If any of you feel indebted after being with someone, that wasn't generosity. That was commerce." Grace's hand shot up the way a child's hand rises in class before memory instructs it to wait. "Can we still have birthday dinner here sometimes? It's not boring here." Eleanor's laugh startled the birds. "Sometimes, yes. When it's about cake, not currency." Noah leaned forward. "Can we help cook at Miss Hale's? We aren't allowed to touch anything." "You may touch everything in my kitchen," Eleanor said. "Even the things I'll pretend you shouldn't." They visited, then light talk about school projects, a soccer goal that had looked impossible until it wasn't, the new paint in Claire's hallway that had turned out to be a different color than the label promised, but exactly right in late afternoon light. The group stayed inside the hours Eleanor had set, and when they left, they left. It was almost peaceful. She was rinsing glasses when a shadow crossed the doorway. Daniel stepped back into the kitchen, expression tight. "She's at the gate," he said softly. Eleanor dried her hands slowly. "Miss Hale." He nodded. "Olivia and I will handle it." "No," Eleanor said. "I will." The garden made a narrow corridor to the side gate, Jasmine threading its way through the fence with quiet insistence. Veronica Hale stood beyond the latch in a dress that tried to convince the day to be more formal than it was. Her smile was small and lethal. "Rose," Veronica said the name chosen because she knew Eleanor disliked its presumption. "We should—" "You may not enter," Eleanor said. Veronica blinked as if the son had misbehaved. "I'm here to apologize for escalations." "An apology is an acknowledgement of harm without a sales pitch," Eleanor said. "And you are not here to offer either." Veronica's mouth twitched. "We're adults. We can find a civilized way to coexist for the sake of the children." "We will," Eleanor said. "My way is simple respect from a distance." "Distance is a poor foundation for family," Veronica said smoothly. "Control is worse," Eleanor replied. Olivia came to stand beside Daniel, not between the women. "Mother," she said quietly, "please go." Veronica's gaze skated over her daughter and landed back on Eleanor. "You've always been gifted at making people feel virtuous for choosing less." Eleanor felt the old tug, the invitation to defend, justify, outline a syllabus of care. She let it pass like weather she no longer needed to predict. "This gate is closed to you," she said. "That's all." Veronica's smile didn't reach anything that mattered. "You'll hear from me." "I already have," Eleanor said. "Your vase of flowers on my son's step said more than any letter could." Veronica turned, then a single pivot, and left. The air felt cleaner once her perfume dissipated. Daniel exhaled. Olivia's shoulders dropped as if an armored piece she'd worn so long it had grown a name had finally been set down. "Are you all right?" Olivia asked. "I am correct," Eleanor said. "All right, we'll come and go." 3 days later, a heavy envelope arrived with Veronica's monogram stamped in gold, as if metal could purchase gravity. Eleanor set it on the hall table and finished her tea before she touched it. She slit the top, slid-out pages that smelled faintly of money and read a letter that practiced contrition while prosecuting a case. It ended with a request, a private meeting to establish a truce for the good of the family. Eleanor considered the fountain in Rome the decision she had made there without coins or ceremony. She carried the letter to her desk, opened a drawer, and took out simple stationery with her name centered at the top. "Miss Hale," she wrote, "I will meet you once in a public place to state my boundaries plainly. There will be no truce to negotiate. There will be terms to observe. Tuesday, 2 o'clock, the Willow Street Tea Room. If you prefer not to attend under those conditions, that will also be acceptable." She signed her full name, not the one the world had used when she was everyone's solution. When she sealed the envelope, she felt the quiet satisfaction of a door clicking shut on a room that had never been hers. The house held the sound, then gave it back as something like music. The Willow Street Tea Room smelled faintly of bergamot and old lace. Eleanor Hart arrived 10 minutes early and chose a corner table where she could see both the door and the street. She set a slim sheet of paper beside a pot of Earl Grey and waited without rehearsing. At exactly 2, Veronica Hale appeared sleek, precise, as if the afternoon had been ironed. She sat without asking. "Thank you for agreeing to talk," Veronica said, voice pitched to suggest magnanimity. "Let's be sensible women about this." "I'm here to be clear," Eleanor replied. "Not sensible. Clarity rarely pleases everyone." A server poured tea. Veronica declined sugar. Eleanor stirred 1 cube in the small spoon, chiming against porcelain. "These are my terms," Eleanor said, sliding the sheet across. "I'll read them aloud once. I won't defend them." Veronica's eyes flickered, then settled. Eleanor read, "No triangulation, no messages via Daniel, Claire, or the grandchildren. No strategic scheduling that forces choosing. If dates overlap, people will decide without pressure. No gifts with strings. Commerce isn't care. No financial entanglement with me or my home now or ever. No commentary about me to my family and none from me about you. Public civility. Private distance." Veronica's mouth tilted. "You make me sound Machiavellian. You made yourself sound generous," Eleanor said evenly. Both were misreadings. Veronica set a manicured finger on the line about finances. "For the record, the mortgage is no longer yours," Eleanor said, "and it was never a kindness." A beat, then that famous breath Veronica used to reset rooms. "Very well, I'll agree to your etiquette, but surely we can manage more than armistice. We are, after all, family. We're relatives by adjacency," Eleanor said. "The family part doesn't require us to share a table. It requires you to stop trying to own it." Richard, Veronica began. "Is irrelevant," Eleanor said. "Whose idea it was doesn't matter. Participation does." For the first time, something uncomposed showed in Veronica's face, an involuntary flicker. She folded the page with surgical neatness, then slid it back, noted. "You keep it," Eleanor said. "Terms work better when both parties can't claim amnesia." They sipped. Noise from the street rose and fell like surf. When they stood, Veronica offered a hand. Eleanor didn't take it. "Mutual respect," Eleanor said, from a distance. Outside, the winter sun laid a thin sheen of light on the pavement. Eleanor tucked her copy into her bag and felt something click in her ribcage where a hinge had rusted. Spring came early that year, as if the weather had been copying Eleanor's calendar. She built a week that wasn't centered on anyone's emergencies book club on Mondays, with retired teachers who argued amiably about commas. Wednesdays at the community garden, dirt under nails, a kind of liturgy. A Thursday watercolor class where she learned that letting water move is the point, not the error. Weekends were invitations, not obligations. Family adjusted. Daniel and Olivia left the guest house and rented an apartment with imperfect floors and perfect light. The twins cooked at Eleanor's elbows on counters, flour rising like weather. Can we stir became can we season. Claire shifted traditions, suggesting a harbor memorial for David, petals scattered from a boat at sunset, instead of a heavy meal designed to hold grief down. Eleanor came, stood slightly back present without presiding. It felt less like stepping away and more like making room. Richard sent a letter that apologized without changing anything. Eleanor filed it under history and responded to nothing. Veronica tried once more via embossed stationery. Eleanor replied with a copy of the terms and no salutation. The gate stayed closed and the garden grew. On a mild Sunday, they gathered in Eleanor's yard by invitation, not summons. Lemonade canvas chairs, shade that knew its job. She spoke first and briefly, not a lecture, but a map. Love remains. Availability does not. Heads nodded, no one reached for a gavel. When time ended, people left. The leaving landed softly. Ava lingered after one visit, holding a colander the way a girl holds the future. "Teach me the pasta from wherever that was," she said, grinning. "First rule," Eleanor answered, closing the colander under the tap. "Salt the water until it tastes like the sea you miss." They cooked, and the kitchen was a place you could touch. On the morning of her 66th birthday, a note waited by Eleanor's kettle in Ava's looping script. Operation Redemption. 9 a.m. Dress for walking. Pancakes appeared, blueberries folded in like good news. Then a picnic under swan boats in the public garden. Then an hour at the museum in front of a Monet that made everyone breathe more slowly. The twins presented hand-drawn tickets to Grandma's next adventure and a playlist titled Trains Not Planes and Windows That Open. Evening fell into this garden where strings of lights threaded themselves between branches. Daniel was at the grill with Noah. Olivia and Claire arranged bowls of olives, tomatoes, torn bread. No one asked Eleanor to sit. Everyone made sure there was a chair. When dessert plates were cleared, Daniel set a large envelope on the table as if it contained weather. "From all of us," he said. "No strings. Inside train tickets and a small stack of reservations in Provence." A card from Margot, who had become a long-distance verb. "Come. We'll practice letting water move." Eleanor looked around the table, faces lit, not by her effort but by their own. and felt that rarest of satisfactions being valued for existing. "Thank you," she said, simple as bread. Later, alone with dishwater and the hum of a house that had learned to rest, Eleanor set a fresh page on her desk and wrote, "The table is still here. I don't live on it." Outside, roses waited for pruning. She would cut what needed cutting. She would let what wanted to bloom bloom. The old air had finally gone out of the room. New air had moved in. She poured herself tea and didn't listen for a phone. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. If this story resonated with you or made you reflect, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to share them in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next story. I'll see you next time as we continue exploring more journeys and lessons together.